Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back millennia to the shores of the Nile, to a civilization famous for pyramids, pharaohs, and deities who monitored your every breath. But beneath the golden masks and magnificent temples lurks a far more brutal truth. Today we're exploring what would it be like if you survived just one day in ancient Egypt. Because trust me, the scorching sun is just the beginning of your problems. You'd be battling intestinal parasites from contaminated water, bone-crushing labour under the overseer's lash, and a lifespan that rarely saw you past 20. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I have to offer. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, and tell me in the comments what special history you want to hear about. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of pyramids, gods, and merciless solar punishment. Before you even crack your eyelids open, the sun is already hammering through your papyrus walls like it's trying out for the position of merciless desert overlord. There are no curtains, no blinds, and definitely no climate control. Just the brutal, unrelenting heat of the wasteland cooking everything, including you, before dawn breaks. You're sprawled on a woven reed mat with a linen covering that's more wishful thinking than actual protection. The cooling Nile winds you heard about in all those history documentaries. Yeah, they're a myth. Probably vanished somewhere around the Old Kingdom. By the time you drag yourself outside, the mercury is already dancing with 90 degrees Fahrenheit, around 32 degrees Celsius. And the day has barely started. The sun doesn't just rise in ancient Egypt, it wages war. Your linen garment? Completely pointless. It's like wearing parchment in a furnace. And forget about sun protection. There's no cooling gel, no UV blockers, not even a wide-brimmed hat from some ancient marketplace. Ancient Egyptians did have protective oils, but unless you're wealthy or working in a temple, you're not getting any of it. Your best bet? Slather yourself with river mud or hippo fat, which, supposedly, might prevent you from becoming a walking piece of charcoal. Supposedly. Ah yes, the legendary Nile, the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, worshipped as divine, the foundation upon which this entire civilization stands. But let's be real, it also reeks like a fish market that got into a fight with a bog. The shoreline is swarming with insects, amphibians, and creatures that definitely shouldn't have that many appendages, but somehow do. Yet this is your bathroom. Soap is still centuries away from being invented, and even if it existed, you couldn't afford it. Instead, you cleanse yourself with the cutting-edge hygiene technology of the era, gritty sand. That's right, exfoliation, ancient Egyptian style. Just scrub yourself raw with coarse particles and call it a beauty treatment. It's like nature's sandpaper, but with questionable results. Laundry, also handled in the Nile. And by laundry, we mean beating them against stones while hoping a hippo doesn't confuse your washing for an afternoon appetizer. Oh, and just to spice things up, let's not overlook the periodic waste overflow from upriver. Remember, humans, cattle, and the occasional burial barge all use this waterway, and somehow this passes for hygienic. You scrub, rinse, and surface, feeling marginally less grimy, and only somewhat more concerned about bloodsuckers. If you're a city dweller in Memphis or Thebes, you might be lucky enough to use a public basin or cistern, but for everyone else, it's Nile or nothing. And don't expect privacy. This is a communal washing area, shared by families, neighbours, livestock, and the random sacred ibis strutting around your feet like it owns the place. Water vessels are filled and balanced on sculls, hauled back to your adobe dwelling before the noon sun transforms the clay into charcoal. It's a daily ceremony, spiritual, essential, and mildly terrifying. So yes, the Nile is holy. It nourishes you, cleanses you, and satisfies your thirst. But let's not kid ourselves that it's a pristine paradise. In truth, it's part divine intervention, part health hazard, and your only option. By now, you've bathed in the predator-filled Nile. You've abraded yourself reasonably clean, and your skin feels like a dried apricot. Time for breakfast, the most crucial and least appetizing meal of your ancient Egyptian existence. Let's manage expectations. There are no poached eggs, no fresh fruit platters, definitely no chilled coffee drinks. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less of a gastronomic experience and more of a strategic energy replenishment. You perch on a wooden block, if you own one, or simply crouch in the dirt like everyone else. The star of your meal? Bread, mountains of it, thick, gritty, and often as tough as dried papyrus. It's crafted from ancient wheat or barley and fired in mud ovens that may or may not house the neighbourhood rodents. And don't be shocked if there's grit in your portion, not as seasoning, just an unwelcome addition from the millstones. A daily serving of earth, you might say. Then comes the beer. But don't get your hopes up. This isn't refreshing, sparkling artisan brew. This is dense, murky, room temperature liquid grain, more gruel than goblet. It's loaded with nutrition and barely alcoholic, a prehistoric protein shake with the subtle flavour of fermented oats and desperation. Even toddlers consume it, not to be rebellious, but because it's less dangerous than water. At least the fermentation process eliminates the worms, unlike the Nile, which, as we just covered, is essentially a bacterial playground. If fortune smiles upon you, and we mean genuinely smiles, you might score a leek or some withered figs to accompany your charcoal bread combination. Meat? Only if someone netted a fish and didn't immediately devour it uncooked. And as you gnaw your stone-hard loaf and gulp your cereal slurry, insects swarm around you like you're hosting a feast, because you are, for them. You brush them away with one hand, clutch your vessel with the other, and try not to dwell on the reality that this is probably the finest meal you'll enjoy today. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about taste, it's about survival. It powers your frame just enough to endure until someone passes you another grit-laden brick of sustenance. Bon appétit. You've consumed your sandy bread, your lumpy beer, and just enough downtime to call yourself operational. Now it's time to work. And believe me, ancient Egyptian labour makes modern stress look like a wellness retreat. Unless you're a scribe, a priest, or royalty, which, let's face it, you're not. Your job is pure brawn and grit. No climate-controlled office, no refreshment breaks, no supportive seating. Just perspiration, dust, and a perpetual threat of dropping before midday. If you're a farmer, you'll be knee-deep in river silt by dawn, pulling weeds or sowing grain under the gaze of a supervisor whose primary skill is shouting. You use timber ploughs, primitive scythes, and your raw hands. If your spine aches, excellent. That means you're productive. If you're a labourer, things become even more Old Testament. Picture dragging massive blocks for monument construction under a merciless sun, unshod, up inclines made of rubble and hope. There's no workplace safety here. You stumble, that's a fractured leg and a dismissive grunt from the boss. Working on burial sites? That's another tier of hardship. You're pounding sandstone, carving out eternal chambers for people who will get to slumber longer than you ever will. And if you botch a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say employment security might include a sealed vault and an ancient hex. And if you're a woman, you're not exempt. Household duties are also manual labour, crushing wheat, fetching water, spinning fabric, tending children, and still assisting in the crops. Your respite is when the infant sleeps for 5 minutes. While you prepare supper, you snack standing up. You dab sweat with your garment. You stay in motion, because hesitating means lagging behind. And lagging behind means someone else claims your food ration, and you bear the consequences. There's no punching out. The sun is your manager. When it finally disappears beyond the dunes, you drag yourself home, barely breathing, dirt-covered, and fantasizing about cushioned footwear and a less vindictive solar deity. Work in ancient Egypt isn't just demanding, it's relentless. A complete physical dedication to existence, day after day, until your frame surrenders or your supervisor decides you're not worth the grain. And that's not even the worst part. After pouring your essence into the fields or stone pit, you might be tempted to voice dissatisfaction. Perhaps something minor, a quiet, "This occupation is terrible," or "Why am I enduring this?" Hold that thought, because in ancient Egypt, griping isn't just discouraged, it's potentially seditious. Why? Because your superior isn't merely a leader, he's a living deity. The pharaoh isn't some individual who got voted in or inherited a fortunate bloodline. He's the mortal manifestation of Horus, offspring of Ra, selected by the cosmos to govern Egypt and maintain Ma'at, sacred universal balance. Put differently, if the river overflows perfectly this season, credit the pharaoh. If it fails, well, perhaps you didn't worship adequately. Challenging his dominion isn't just disrespectful, it's heretical. Bad-mouthing him could earn you an appointment with a lash, a pair of chains, or a premature journey to the afterlife. Minus your cherished grave goods, you witness his image constantly, on monuments, sanctuary walls, currency, even baking molds. By noon, the pavement beneath your soles is scorching enough to prepare legumes. Shelter is a privilege, vegetation is scarce. You might find brief respite cowering behind a clay barrier, but even that structure is perspiring by now. You, meanwhile, resemble someone who was tossed into a kiln and abandoned, and you'd better not grumble. Ra, the solar god, is observing. In ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't merely climate, it was celestial power. The more intense the heat, the more energized Ra was feeling. So essentially, if you're liquefying, it's a divine endorsement. In summary, enduring one day in ancient Egypt demands fluid intake, modesty, and an unshakable capacity for feeling like roasted poultry. And this is merely the dawn. You're finally vertical, or rather off your prickly reed bedding. And the positive news is, the Nile is just a brief trek away. The negative news? You can already detect its aroma before you glimpse it. Yes, the legendary Nile, the lifeline of ancient Egypt, worshipped as divine, the foundation upon which this entire civilization stands. But let's be real, it also reeks like a seafood vendor that got into a dispute with a marsh. The shoreline is teeming with insects, amphibians, and creatures that definitely shouldn't possess limbs, but somehow do. Yet this is your washroom. Cleansing agents haven't been conceived yet, and even if they existed, you couldn't purchase them. Instead, you scrub yourself with the most advanced purification technology of the era. Abrasive particles. That's correct. Exfoliation. Ancient Egyptian style. Just scour yourself with rough granules and call it a beauty regimen. It's like nature's grinding tool, but with questionable results. Laundering garments, also accomplished in the Nile. And by laundering, we mean battering them against boulders, while hoping a crocodile doesn't confuse your washing for a noon treat. Oh, and just to add excitement, let's not overlook the periodic waste discharge from upriver. Remember, humans, cattle, and the periodic burial vessel all use this waterway. And somehow, this passes for sanitary. You scrub, rinse and surface feeling marginally less grimy, and only somewhat more concerned about bloodsuckers. If you're a city dweller in Memphis or Thebes, you might be lucky enough to use a public basin or cistern. But for everyone else, it's Nile or nothing. And don't expect privacy. This is a communal washing area, shared by families, neighbors, livestock, and the random sacred ibis strutting around your feet like it owns the place. Water vessels are filled and balanced on skulls, hauled back to your adobe dwelling before the noon sun transforms the clay into charcoal. It's a daily ceremony, spiritual, essential, and mildly terrifying. So yes, the Nile is holy. It nourishes you, cleanses you, and satisfies your thirst. But let's not kid ourselves that it's a pristine paradise. In truth, it's part divine intervention, part health hazard, and your only option. By now, you've bathed in the predator-filled Nile. You've abraded yourself reasonably clean, and your skin feels like a dried apricot. Time for breakfast, the most crucial and least appetizing meal of your ancient Egyptian existence. Let's manage expectations. There are no poached eggs, no fresh fruit platters, definitely no chilled coffee drinks. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less of a gastronomic experience and more of a strategic energy replenishment. You perch on a wooden block, if you own one, or simply crouch in the dirt like everyone else. The star of your meal, bread, mountains of it, thick, gritty, and often as tough as dried papyrus. It's crafted from ancient wheat or barley and fired in mud ovens that may or may not house the neighborhood rodents. And don't be shocked if there's grit in your portion, not as seasoning, just an unwelcome addition from the millstones. A daily serving of earth, you might say. Then comes the beer. But don't get your hopes up. This isn't refreshing, sparkling artisan brew. This is dense, murky, room-temperature liquid grain, more gruel than goblet. It's loaded with nutrition and barely alcoholic. A prehistoric protein shake with the subtle flavor of fermented oats and desperation. Even toddlers consume it. Not to be rebellious, but because it's less dangerous than water. At least the fermentation process eliminates the worms, unlike the Nile, which, as we just covered, is essentially a bacterial playground. If fortune smiles upon you, and we mean genuinely smiles, you might score a leek or some withered figs to accompany your charcoal bread combination. Meat? Only if someone netted a fish and didn't immediately devour it uncooked. And as you gnaw your stone-hard loaf and gulp your cereal slurry, insects swarm around you like you're hosting a feast, because you are, for them. You brush them away with one hand, clutch your vessel with the other, and try not to dwell on the reality that this is probably the finest meal you'll enjoy today. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about taste, it's about survival. It powers your frame just enough to endure until someone passes you another grit-laden brick of sustenance. Bon appétit. You've consumed your sandy bread, your lumpy beer, and just enough downtime to call yourself operational. Now it's time to work. And believe me, ancient Egyptian labor makes modern stress look like a wellness retreat, unless you're a scribe, a priest, or royalty, which, let's face it, you're not. Your job is pure brawn and grit. No climate-controlled office, no refreshment breaks, no supportive seating, just perspiration, dust, and a perpetual threat of dropping before midday. If you're a farmer, you'll be knee-deep in river silt by dawn, pulling weeds or sowing grain under the gaze of a supervisor whose primary skill is shouting. You use timber plows, primitive scythes, and your raw hands. If your spine aches, excellent. That means you're productive. If you're a labourer, things become even more Old Testament. Picture dragging massive blocks for monument construction under a merciless sun, unshod, up inclines made of rubble and hope. There's no workplace safety here. You stumble, that's a fractured leg and a dismissive grunt from the boss. Working on burial sites. That's another tier of hardship. You're pounding sandstone, carving out eternal chambers for people who will get to slumber longer than you ever will. And if you botch a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say employment security might include a sealed vault and an ancient hex. And if you're a woman, you're not exempt. Household duties are also manual labour. Crushing wheat, fetching water, spinning fabric, tending children, and still assisting in the crops. Your respite is when the infant sleeps for 5 minutes. While you prepare supper, you snack standing up. You dab sweat with your garment. You stay in motion because hesitating means lagging behind. And lagging behind means someone else claims your food ration and you bear the consequences. There's no punching out. The sun is your manager. When it finally disappears beyond the dunes, you drag yourself home, barely breathing, dirt-covered, and fantasizing about cushioned footwear and a less vindictive solar deity. Work in ancient Egypt isn't just demanding, it's relentless. A complete physical dedication to existence, day after day, until your frame surrenders or your supervisor decides you're not worth the grain. And that's not even the worst part. After pouring your essence into the fields or stone pit, you might be tempted to voice dissatisfaction. Perhaps something minor, a quiet, "This occupation is terrible," or "Why am I enduring this?" Hold that thought. Because in ancient Egypt, griping isn't just discouraged, it's potentially seditious. Why? Because your superior isn't merely a leader, he's a living deity. The pharaoh isn't some individual who got voted in or inherited a fortunate bloodline. He's the mortal manifestation of Horus, offspring of Ra, selected by the cosmos to govern Egypt and maintain Ma'at, sacred universal balance. Put differently, if the river overflows perfectly this season, credit the pharaoh. If it fails, well, perhaps you didn't worship adequately. Challenging his dominion isn't just disrespectful, it's heretical. Bad-mouthing him could earn you an appointment with a lash, a pair of chains, or a premature journey to the afterlife, minus your cherished grave goods. You witness his image constantly, on monuments, sanctuary walls, currency, even baking molds. His title is recited in ceremonies. His likeness is rendered larger than everyone else's in every fresco. That's not creative liberty, that's doctrine. And don't expect to ever glimpse him. If you're a peasant, the nearest you'll get is observing a golden vessel drift past during a sacred celebration. Blink, and he's vanished. Back to a fortress you'll never access, surrounded by advisors, sentries, clerks, and enough treasure to fund a minor kingdom. Which, interesting fact, he essentially does. If you're fortunate enough to labour on a royal undertaking, say a burial chamber, a shrine, or a monument the size of a hill, you toil with sacred enthusiasm. At least that's what the regime claims. You echo it too, because feigning honour to chisel rock for 14 hours daily is wiser than the alternative. And don't even consider revolt. Pharaohs demolish insurrections quicker than you can utter succession. Just inquire with the last settlement that attempted to refuse tribute. Oh wait, you cannot. It no longer stands. So yes, the pharaoh is celestial. And you? You're simply fortunate to be permitted to perspire in his honour. Now return to your duties. If you believed enduring under the sun was challenging, just wait until you discover that in ancient Egypt, sand is your housemate, colleague, condiment, and eternal adversary. It's omnipresent, in your garments, in your sleeping area, in your meals. There is no avoiding it. You could be labouring, worshipping, resting, or minding your affairs in the bazaar, and suddenly a blast of scorching air passes by and transforms your face into a gritty scrubbing session you never requested. Let's begin with the clothing. You wear linen. It's lightweight, airy, and about as useful at blocking sand as a fishing net is at containing water. It trickles down your robe, adheres to your flesh, and somehow discovers its way into locations you didn't realize had folds. Dining, best of luck. Every piece of bread is essentially a grit sandwich. Since grain was crushed between stone wheels, tiny fragments of rock made their way into the mixture. Egyptians didn't just consume their wheat, they consumed their grinding equipment too. It's why ancient tooth remains are often ground smooth like polished stones. Picture chewing your morning meal while simultaneously wearing down your teeth daily, and if you assumed your dwelling was a sand-free sanctuary, reconsider. Your clay brick residence has openings, fissures, and apertures with no barriers, ideal gateways for wind-carried particles. Your surfaces are blanketed, your vessels are filled. Your sleeping space is essentially a dust pit masquerading as bedding. Footwear, rarely available. Most Egyptians travelled unshod, meaning you're constantly one pace away from converting your feet into weathered hide coverings. If you do possess foot protection, it's typically a simple pair of sandals crafted from marsh plants. Stylish, maybe. Defensive, hardly. Then there are dust storms, Egypt's interpretation of divine punishment, abrupt, whirling, obscuring. One instant you're conversing with a companion, the next you're expelling grit and feeling like someone emptied an entire desert into your vision. Sight vanishes completely, and everyone nearby becomes vaguely wheezing shadows. In summary, sand is the companion who never departs, the flavour in every dish, and the invisible foe of your sight, breathing, and self-respect. It's not merely the setting of your existence, it's integrated into your being now. And no, you cannot rinse it away. You already attempted in the Nile, which is likely saturated with additional sand. In ancient Egypt, spirituality isn't merely a weekly observance, it's the framework for everything. Your occupation, your nutrition, your cleansing practices, your evening customs, all governed by deities who appear to have extremely particular preferences. First, grasp this: the gods are omnipresent. Your settlement has shrines to numerous different divinities, each accountable for some essential purpose. There's Ra, who steers the sun across the heavens like it's a celestial chariot. Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of knowledge, oversees clerks and lunar schedules. Sobek, part crocodile, part terror incarnate, protects the Nile. And Bastet, the feline goddess, essentially manages public image. Forget individual liberty. Your daily schedule centers around satisfying them. Rise up, praise Ra, drop some beer, make amends to Hathor, bang your toe, mutter quietly, or risk summoning a spirit with a vendetta. Before eating, you present a portion of sustenance to the gods. Before sleep, you pray that Set, deity of disorder, doesn't hurl your dwelling into cosmic chaos overnight. Even burials are extended ceremonies where the departed must endure trials, evade demons, and demonstrate they were ethically sound or face eternal obliteration. Speaking of the hereafter, ancient Egyptians regarded it with utmost gravity. You don't simply perish and continue on. You must survive a judgment ritual involving your heart being measured against a plume of truth. If your heart's weightier because of deception, brutality, or perhaps pilfering someone's livestock, you're devoured by Ammit, a beast with the skull of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the limbs of your deepest fears. So yes, even in death, you're still under scrutiny. But here's the revelation. This intricate belief structure, it isn't disheartening. It's reassuring. Egyptians believed existence was part of a universal equilibrium, and if you observed the ceremonies and maintained Ma'at, the doctrine of truth and harmony, you had a prospect at a tranquil eternity. complete with nourishment, kinfolk, and perhaps a vessel. Naturally, the wealthier you were, the more the gods appeared to acknowledge you. Sanctuaries were enormous, clergy were influential, and commoners, well, they simply hoped the gods were feeling benevolent that day. Because in ancient Egypt, devotion isn't voluntary. It's your role definition, your protection policy, and your route map for the subsequent existence. You've trodden on something pointed, got nipped by something peculiar, or contracted something infectious, which, in ancient Egypt, is essentially Wednesday. Time to pursue medical attention. Just don't anticipate a reception area or a sanitized setting. You're about to be treated with a mixture of incantations, botanicals, and pure hopefulness. First, you'll be brought to a physician, and to be honest, they were among the most sophisticated in the ancient realm. They possessed surgical instruments, medical manuscripts, and a reasonable grasp of physiology. But here's the complication. Science in ancient Egypt always arrived with a substantial portion of mysticism. You're administered a compress made of honey, spoiled bread, and pulverized plants. Honey is antimicrobial, and mold contains primitive penicillin qualities, so it functions somewhat. But before administering it, the healer will recite a safeguarding charm, just to be cautious. Because you never know when your abdominal discomfort is actually the consequence of a vindictive phantom or an irate deity. Have a migraine? You might receive a treatment of mashed onions massaged into your scalp while someone chants a hymn to Thoth. Cardiac pain? Let's apply cow excrement mixed with dates on your chest and observe what occurs. Ocular infection? Time for a mixture of reptile blood, ochre, and beer, plus a petition to Horus. Surgery? It did occur. Boils were emptied, bones were aligned, and injuries were sewn with linen cord. But there's no pain relief, just a keen blade, and a companion to restrain your shoulders while you wail into a clay cushion. Dental care, not excellent. Remember all that grit in the bread? Your teeth are ground down by your 20s. If one becomes infected, your choices are endure it, perish from it, have it extracted with something resembling forceps crafted by a metal worker with questionable standards. And let's not overlook the talismans. Whether you're delivering a child, getting sutured, or just sneezing too vigorously, a competent doctor-priest will likely suspend a charm around your neck, just in case the actual problem is an invisible serpent spirit coiled around your organs. So yes, Egyptian medicine had its achievements, but primarily you'd better trust in the gods, because your bandage is literally a supplication. Here's a plot twist most people don't anticipate. Ancient Egyptian women possessed more privileges than many women in subsequent civilizations. They could possess assets, operate enterprises, petition for divorce, and even bring a man to trial. Sounds forward-thinking, right? But before you prepare your luggage for a time-travelling executive vacation, pause. Because while the legal standing might astound you, the everyday reality, not so magnificent. If you're a woman in ancient Egypt, you likely awaken before dawn. You're crushing grain manually using a massive flat stone that grinds through both wheat and your vertebrae. Then it's off to transport water from the Nile, prepare breakfast, tend to offspring, oversee the household, nourish livestock, and, if required, assist in the crops. You're a single-woman operation in linen. There's no personal time, no relaxation days, and certainly no maternal leave. Delivery is dangerous and agonizing. Midwives are beneficial, certainly, but there are no pain blockers, no antiseptic, and no birthing playlists featuring soothing lyres. You deliver in a sweltering chamber with incense, supplications, and hopefully not excessive hemorrhaging. Let's discuss attire. Linen garments are lightweight and airy, but there's no undergarments and no footwear. The sun blisters your flesh. The grit scrapes into everything, and the insects consider you an unlimited feast. Want cosmetics? Excellent. Egyptian women did wear makeup, but it's lead-based and administered with implements that look suspiciously like wooden splinters. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be born into an affluent household, circumstances are improved. You might read, write, oversee property records, or become a priestess. If you're born noble, you could even become pharaoh, like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, who governed with intelligence and intimidating eye paint. But if you're impoverished, your standing may be lawful, but your existence is corporeal. You toil, perspire, stoop, transport, deliver, inter, and worship. You're not shackled by statute, but by existence. Still, Egyptian women had autonomy, and that was significant. They could testify in court, retain their inheritance, and didn't become possessions when they wed. Compared to many ancient societies, that's enormous. So yes, Egyptian women had privileges, but ease, that's reserved for sculptures and goddesses, not the woman wrist deep in dough while batting flies off a child. You survived another punishing day in ancient Egypt. You consumed your sandy bread, transported your vessels, avoided celestial fury, and maybe even escaped a dust storm. Time to unwind, right? Incorrect. Because in ancient Egypt, your genuine trial commences after you perish. Death isn't the conclusion. It's just the start of an incredibly administrative multi-stage voyage through the netherworld. And if you thought the work supervisor was demanding, wait until you encounter the deities of judgment. First, your spirit takes a journey to the Hall of Ma'at. Here, before a council of 42 divinities, you must declare your innocence in what's essentially the oldest legal testimony in history. You state things like, I did not pilfer, I did not deceive, I did not desire my neighbour's livestock, all while hoping the gods accept it. Then arrives the heart examination. Literally, your heart, considered to be the centre of the soul, is positioned on a balance opposite the feather of Ma'at, the emblem of truth, justice, and equilibrium. If your heart is weightier than the feather, well, that indicates you've lived a corrupt life. Enter Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippo. All horrifying. She doesn't apprehend you. She doesn't penalize you. She consumes your soul, annihilating it permanently. No afterlife, no second opportunities, just eternal non-existence. Which, in a culture fixated with eternity, is the ultimate retribution. And it improves. You can condemn yourself not just by deeds, but by utterances. One incorrect confession, one overlooked line during your judgment, and boom, spiritual destruction. It's like an open book examination where failure means getting consumed by a mythological death creature. If you do succeed, congratulations. You get to access the field of reeds, a serene, perfected version of Egypt where your soul exists forever, with vessels, with harvests, with kinfolk, and presumably with fewer sand parasites. But the consequences? Massive. That's why Egyptians fixated over tomb preparation, burial ceremonies, and mystical texts like the Book of the Dead, a spiritual reference guide full of prayers, incantations, and useful advice like don't offend the crocodile deity. So yes, the afterlife might be magnificent, but only if you live your life very cautiously. One profanity, one unpaid shrine tribute, and your next destination is nourishment for Amit. Rest well. If there's one minor blessing in ancient Egypt, it's this: linen. Sacred, ventilated linen. Your entire closet, and everyone else's, is crafted from this plant-based material. It's lightweight, cool, and allows your skin to breathe in the blistering heat. That's the positive news. The negative news? That's essentially where the comfort concludes. Whether you're a cultivator, constructor, priest, or merchant, you're wearing the same ensemble every day. For men, a brief white skirt or undergarment. For women, a straight sleeveless linen gown, sometimes supported by straps, sometimes not. If you're upper class, you might have folds, ornaments, or elaborate designs. If you're not, it's plain white or slightly greyish, depending on how long it's been since washing day. Oh, and washing day. You're hand cleaning your garments in the Nile while hoping a hippo doesn't surface mid-scrub. Most people go unshod. Sandals crafted from braided reeds or hide are reserved for special events or temple clergy. So unless you're royalty, expect to spend your days with scorching sand between your toes and possibly a jagged stone in your soul. Accessories, certainly, but mostly practical. Charms for protection, jewellery to display status, and eye makeup made from ground charcoal. Which wasn't just for appearance, it helped diminish glare from the sun and allegedly prevented infections. Yes, even eyeliner had a purpose in ancient Egypt, but no matter how well you dress, the insects don't care. Flies, gnats, mosquitoes, they treat your ventilated outfit as an invitation. You're walking through the day, swatting constantly, applying scented oils, and praying that your linen doesn't adhere to you like a damp sheet the moment the sun reaches peak intensity. And of course, your outfit doesn't change with the seasons, because Egypt doesn't really have seasons, just scorching and slightly less scorching. So your linen ensemble is basically your year-round uniform, whether it's 110 degrees or a chilly 70 degrees evening. So yes, Egyptian clothing was light, elegant, and far more comfortable than what Romans would wear later. But don't let the breezy outfits fool you, because no matter how flowing your tunic feels, your life is still heavy, with labour, heat, sand, and bugs that refuse to respect your personal space. You've endured another scorching Egyptian day, transporting bricks, evading sandstorms, and praying your linen doesn't fall apart mid-task. But in ancient Egypt, survival is always temporary, because no matter how resilient you are, you probably won't live past 35. Let's break it down. If you make it past childhood, which is already an achievement considering infant mortality rates were astronomical, you're thrust straight into adulthood by age 13. Marriage, work, and child rearing all start early because honestly, you're running out of time. You might die from heat exhaustion, or an infected wound, or childbirth, or crocodiles, or scorpion stings, or contaminated bread, and forget antibiotics. If you get a fever, the best treatment is honey, herbs, and hoping the gods don't have other plans for your soul. But here's the twist. Egyptians weren't terrified of death. They prepared for it. In fact, they prepared for it better than most people plan for retirement today. If you're wealthy, you commission a tomb, the ancient version of a 5-star eternity suite. You start accumulating grave goods, jewellery, food offerings, perfumes, statues, even tiny servant dolls called shabtis to do your chores in the afterlife. Think of them as spiritual interns who work while you nap forever. Your body is embalmed, wrapped in linen, stuffed with natron, natural salt, and tucked neatly into a painted sarcophagus. You're buried with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which is less about doom and more like a mystical travel guide, complete with passwords for the afterlife, spells to confuse demons, and instructions for not getting eaten by soul-devouring monsters. If you're impoverished, well, your tomb is likely a shallow pit in the sand. Your body is wrapped in whatever fabric your family can spare, maybe a pot or two placed nearby, and then covered with earth. No murals, no golden mask, just you and the wind. But even the poorest Egyptians held on to the dream of the afterlife, a peaceful, fertile paradise called the Field of Reeds, where you farm without sweat, eat without hunger, and sail the Nile forever under gentle sunlight. So yes, you'll probably die young in ancient Egypt, but if you lived well, prayed right, and didn't insult too many jackal-headed gods, you just might spend eternity in style. You finally made it to the afterlife, or at least into the tomb. You've been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace, right? Well, not exactly. Because in ancient Egypt, even the deceased get robbed. Let's start with a simple truth. Tombs are full of valuable stuff. Gold, amulets, jewellery, perfumed oils, carved statues, chests full of linens, and, for pharaohs, literal boatloads of treasure, all intended to be taken into the afterlife. But treasure in a tomb is basically an open invitation for someone with a chisel and criminal intentions. Tomb robbery was so widespread that it became a full-time problem. Pharaohs tried to combat it by concealing their tombs deep in cliffs, securing them behind trapdoors and inscribing terrifying curses on the walls. Things like, "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May your limbs be twisted forever by a serpent made of fire." Spoiler, the curses didn't work. Grave robbers came anyway, at night, in secret, with inside knowledge. Sometimes they were locals, sometimes they were corrupt workers who helped build the tombs. In some cases, even priests and guards were involved, and the punishment for getting caught was severe. Think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or death. But considering how valuable tomb goods were, especially gold and rare incense, the risk often seemed worth it. After all, the dead don't fight back. But it's not just the wealthy who got robbed, even commoners' graves were disturbed. Poorer Egyptians might have been buried with a small pot of beer or a loaf of bread for the afterlife. That was still worth stealing. Food was scarce, tools were valuable, and linen was currency. The irony. Tomb robbing wasn't just about greed, sometimes it was about survival. Egypt went through famines, political collapse, and invasions. A hungry worker might break into a tomb not for treasure, but for sustenance. And when your children are starving, a few funeral offerings look less like sacred objects and more like dinner. So in ancient Egypt, you're not safe just because you're dead. Your tomb can be looted, your name erased, and your mummy unwrapped by some desperate soul with a pickaxe and poor moral judgment. Rest in peace. Only if no one knows where you're buried. We've all seen them. Those majestic, mysterious carvings on the walls of temples and tombs. Birds, eyes, snakes, lotus flowers, men walking sideways like they're on a fashion runway. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, visually stunning and insanely difficult to learn. Sure, they look cool, but try reading them. Hieroglyphs weren't just decorative art. They were a comprehensive writing system with over 700 characters and growing. Some symbols represent entire words, others are sounds, and many are determinatives which clarify meaning, because, writing the word star with an actual star symbol might be too straightforward, and don't expect spaces or punctuation. Ancient Egyptian writing was basically one long, beautiful riddle with artistic flair, 0 vowels, and a deep need for context. Oh, and it can be written left to right to left, or top to bottom, depending on what the scribe felt like that day. The trick: look at which way the birds or people are facing. That's your reading direction. If they're facing right, read right. Facing left, read left. And if they're upside down, good luck. Learning to write hieroglyphs wasn't for commoners. Literacy was rare. Maybe 1% of the population could actually read and write. If you wanted in, you had to become a scribe, which meant years of rigorous education starting as a child. You'd memorize hundreds of symbols, copy endless scrolls, and practice so much that your hand probably curled into a claw by age 15. But the payoff? Huge. Scribes were respected, well-fed, and never made to haul bricks under the sun. Instead, they wrote tax records, court documents, letters, and religious texts. They were essential to society and protected from most manual labor. In a world where writing was power, scribes ruled quietly from the shadows. For the rest of the population, though, writing was something magical, literally. Hieroglyphs were believed to have sacred power. Writing someone's name preserved their soul. Erasing it? Total spiritual annihilation. So, yeah, spelling really mattered. So while hieroglyphs may look like ancient emoji, they're more like a linguistic Rubik's Cube wrapped in myth, math, and mystery. Beautiful, yes. Easy to learn, absolutely not. After 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and back-breaking labor, it's time to ask the big question. Would you survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest, probably not. Sure, it's easy to romanticize the ancient world. Golden tombs, lotus-scented air, graceful hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads, and a thing for order and beauty. But behind the iconic monuments and stunning art was a world of brutal realities that spared no one but the elite. Your average Egyptian day started with a dirt floor, a cloud of flies, and the knowledge that if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You walked barefoot on blazing sand, hauled water, cooked over open fires, lived shoulder to shoulder with bugs, smoke, and livestock. You worried about disease, divine punishment, and whether a snake might slither into your sleeping mat. You had no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan, and if you were lucky, maybe 2 changes of linen. You served a god-king who could take your land with a decree, a climate that cooked your skin by noon, and a religion that required you to pass a literal divine test after death just to get into the good version of the afterlife. Let's also not forget the things you didn't have. No antibiotics, no sunscreen, no privacy, no plumbing, no painkillers, and no easy escape. Once you were born into your class, that was it. No promotions, no career changes, no finding yourself. You were either a scribe, a farmer, a labourer, a mother, a servant, or dead. And yet for all this, the ancient Egyptians weren't miserable. They believed deeply in their gods, their purpose, and the beauty of life. They loved music, dance, food, family, and festivals. They joked, they painted, they imagined eternity with enough clarity to build stone monuments that still stand today. But for a modern person, without your air conditioning, your filtered water, your Advil, your sneakers, and your smartphone, you'd fold before the second sandstorm hit. So no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's okay, because they lasted thousands of years. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we still talk about them. In the heart of ancient Teotihuacan, one pyramid refuses to be forgotten. Its surface is adorned not with peaceful symbols of faith or gentle gods, but with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents, dozens of them. They jut out from the temple's facade as if frozen in mid-strike, fangs bared, eyes wide. This is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, known to many as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike most temples that reach for the sky with reverence, this one feels different. It feels predatory. From the moment you approach it, there's an ominous sense that you're being watched. The stone serpent heads aren't mere decoration. They were warnings, symbols of divine wrath, and beneath their gaze, something horrific once unfolded. Excavations over the past few decades have revealed something that archaeologists didn't anticipate. Hidden beneath the temple's base were not just ceremonial offerings, but something far more disturbing, human remains. And not a handful. over 200 bodies, many of them beheaded, hands bound behind their backs. Young men, warriors perhaps, buried in groups, ritual sacrifices arranged with mathematical precision. Some were buried with obsidian knives at their sides, others with necklaces made of human teeth or jewelry crafted from jawbones. They weren't simply thrown into the ground, they were deliberately placed in positions of symbolic significance. It's clear this was no mass grave. It was a message, a divine transaction carved into stone and sealed with blood. But what kind of belief system justifies such horror? Who demanded so many lives be taken at once? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a religious building. It was a theatre of power, a place where rulers fused cosmology, warfare, and fear to maintain control over a city of more than 100,000 souls. And this ritual bloodletting may have been the cost of keeping the cosmos in balance. As you stand before this temple today, gazing at those stone serpents, you're not just looking at art or architecture, you're looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed the gods needed blood and that they had every right to deliver it. But who were these people who commanded such violence and vanished without a trace? The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacan. Before the mighty Aztec Empire, before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar into stone, there stood a city unlike any other in the ancient Americas. Teotihuacan. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, means the place where gods were born. And when you walk its immense avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids that scrape the heavens, you start to understand why. At its peak, around 100 to 250 CE, Teotihuacan was a sprawling metropolis of over 100,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and influence. It was a city meticulously planned, wide boulevards, gridded streets, apartment compounds housing extended families, multi-story structures made from volcanic stone, and at the centre of it all, 3 massive pyramids: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But here's what makes Teotihuacan different. No one knows who built it. Seriously. To this day, we don't know the name of the people who constructed this place. We don't even know what they called themselves. There are no written records, no kings' names carved into stone. Teotihuacan seems to have been a society ruled not by a single monarch, but perhaps by a council, a theocracy, or something altogether foreign to our understanding of ancient power. And despite this anonymity, their influence was colossal. Evidence of Teotihuacan's power has been found hundreds of miles away, from the Maya cities of Tikal and Copan to the distant Zapotec capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, ceramic styles, murals, and even political meddling. In one case, Teotihuacan emissaries may have helped overthrow a local Maya king to install a ruler more favourable to their interests. But how did they maintain such a vast network? How did a city with no known writing system command such authority across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined cosmic ideology with statecraft. Their temples were more than places of worship. They were instruments of control, aligning perfectly with astronomical events, serving as theatres of ritual sacrifice, and reminding every citizen and every visitor that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept time, fate, and blood flowing in sync. And at the heart of it all stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To understand the temple, you must first understand the deity it was dedicated to, the Feathered Serpent. Known later by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl and to the Maya as Kukulkan, This figure is one of the most enigmatic gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. But in Teotihuacan, centuries before the Aztecs rose to power, the feathered serpent was already a central, possibly supreme divine force. But here's the paradox. What kind of god is both a serpent and a bird? Think about that. Serpents slither through the underworld. They shed their skin, symbolizing rebirth, duality, and death. Birds soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. To combine these two, earthbound and sky-dwelling, death and life, chaos and order, was to create something entirely cosmic, something terrifyingly powerful. The feathered serpent wasn't just a god, he was a bridge between worlds. On the facade of the temple, carved in deep relief, we see dozens of his images: goggle eyes, bared teeth, plumed headdresses. Some historians believe these represent the god himself. Others suggest they're warriors or priestly figures adorned in divine regalia to signal their authority. Either way, they are everywhere. The temple is covered in these snake-bird hybrids, as if the structure itself breathes with divine presence. But the feathered serpent wasn't just a god of the heavens. He was intimately tied to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos in motion, and Quetzalcoatl, though later remembered as a gentle, civilizing deity, had a much darker role in Teotihuacan. He demanded offerings, and not just of maize or incense, but of life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create humankind. But to bring life from death, there had to be a trade. The gods sacrificed themselves for humanity, and humans, in return, were expected to do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a monument to faith. It was a cosmic engine designed to link the sky, the earth, and the underworld through ritual. Every stone, every serpent head, every buried victim fed into that system. Teotihuacan didn't just worship the feathered serpent. They embodied his logic, paradox, power, and blood. And the most disturbing truths were hidden beneath the surface. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stood silently, a weathered, imposing structure half swallowed by time. Locals whispered legends, scholars made guesses, but no one could have imagined what was buried beneath its layered stones until archaeologists broke through in the late 1980s and early 2000s. What they found wasn't just unexpected, it was unsettling. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations were a series of long-sealed chambers and pits, each filled with carefully arranged human remains. These weren't the messy results of war or disease. These were deliberate sacrifices, systematic, ritualistic, cold. The victims, numbering over 200, were young men, many between 15 and 25. Some wore necklaces made of human jawbones. Others had their hands tied behind their backs. A few were beheaded. Obsidian knives, sharp and black as night, were scattered nearby, the unmistakable tools of ritual slaughter. And this is where it gets darker. The arrangement of the bodies followed geometric and symbolic patterns. They weren't buried randomly. They were placed in quadrants, cardinal directions, possibly to mirror the cosmos. Even the number of bodies mattered. It wasn't just about death, it was about meaningful death. Offerings surrounded the victims. Jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines, and obsidian blades that had never been used in battle. This wasn't punishment. It was a gift. These young men, most likely warriors, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but to die as part of something transcendent. To the Teotihuacanos, The very act of building a temple may have required human sacrifice. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood, every layer raised only after an offering had been made. The deeper you dig, the more sacrifice you find. In one chamber, archaeologists discovered elaborate tunnels filled with mercury and mica, materials associated with the underworld. The floor glimmered like water. Was this a symbolic passage to the land of the dead, a mirror of the night sky? The more they excavated, the more it felt like the temple was not built on top of death, but constructed to encase it. The blood didn't stain the stone by accident. The stone was meant to hold the blood, and all of it was for the gods. Look closer at the temple of the feathered serpent, and you'll notice something strange, something unnerving. It doesn't just sit on the landscape, it aligns with the universe. Teotihuacan wasn't built randomly. The entire city was laid out along precise cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead runs at a 15-degree angle off true north. Not a mistake, but a deliberate shift, possibly to align with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster or the sun on specific ritual dates. The temple of the feathered serpent sits directly along this avenue, locking it into a grand celestial blueprint. But why? What were they trying to align with? Archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have debated this for decades. Some suggest the temple lines up with the equinox sunrise. Others argue it connects to Venus, the planet most sacred to Mesoamerican civilizations, often associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When Venus rose or set, wars were declared, offerings made, and temples activated with ritual fire. Even the temple's dimensions seem intentional. The repetition of the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears in its step platforms. There's symmetry, rhythm, and a stunning understanding of both earthly math and cosmic cycles, and beneath the surface, more clues. In 2003, archaeologists uncovered a tunnel beneath the temple. Not a crude passage, but a deliberately constructed subterranean world. The walls were once covered in powdered pyrite, a shimmering mineral that would have reflected light like starlight. Combined with mercury pools and mica-lined walls, the tunnel seemed designed to replicate the cosmos itself. To walk through it would be like travelling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey to the underworld, or perhaps to rebirth. Was this temple not just a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine, a portal that aligned earth, sky, and the spirit realm? Some scholars believe Teotihuacan saw time as circular, not linear. Every ritual, every building, every sacrifice wasn't a one-time event. It was part of an eternal cycle, death leading to renewal, sacrifice fueling rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped predict celestial movements, coordinate harvests, and more importantly, time when to offer blood. The temple of the feathered serpent wasn't just looking at the stars, it was trying to speak to them. The temple of the feathered serpent wasn't just a spiritual beacon, it was a political weapon. Its very design was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, to remind every viewer, local or foreign, who held the reins of power in Teotihuacan. Picture standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You, a visitor from a smaller city-state, would arrive at the Avenue of the Dead, already awestruck by the sheer scale of Teotihuacan. But when you reached the temple of the feathered serpent, you'd freeze. The serpent heads stare at you, their fangs bared. Jaguar symbols growl from the stone. The plaza ahead once held massive gatherings, not just for celebration, but for public ritual. You might even witness a sacrifice. The ruling elite of Teotihuacan understood something crucial. Fear is power, and nothing stirs fear like divine wrath. By orchestrating ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and death imagery, they sent a clear message. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this wasn't chaos. This was theatre. Priests in feathered headdresses and obsidian masks would chant, dance, and spill blood, turning cosmic myth into political performance. It wasn't just about pleasing the gods. It was about reminding everyone watching that the city's rulers had direct access to the divine. They alone could open the heavens or summon rain, protect the people or destroy their enemies. Even the architecture helped reinforce this propaganda. From the temple's upper tiers, leaders could look down upon the plaza. They controlled not just the narrative, but the very physical space in which it unfolded. The people looked up at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices, and knew their place. And for outsiders, Teotihuacan didn't need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries would carry home tales of awe and terror. They would speak of the feathered serpents, the endless avenues, the blood rituals that lit the sky red. In a world where gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacan positioned itself as their chosen mouthpiece, and the temple of the feathered serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its zenith, Teotihuacan was the heartbeat of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. But around the year 550 CE, something changed. Something broke, and the silence that followed was as chilling as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacan was not loud and glorious. It was gradual, then sudden. Signs of strain began appearing decades earlier. Signs that the cosmic engine was faltering. Evidence points to a long period of drought, crop failure, and social unrest. The very systems that had sustained this grand city, centralized power, religious dominance, cosmic order, began to crack under pressure, and then came the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered widespread burn layers across elite compounds, temples, and administrative buildings, including signs of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. What's strange is that the lower-class residential areas were mostly untouched. This wasn't an external invasion. This was an uprising, a rebellion, possibly from within. The very people who once watched sacrifices in awe may have risen against their priest kings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, once a symbol of divine authority, was ransacked. Sculptures were defaced, fires were set, ritual spaces were desecrated, and then silence. Teotihuacan wasn't completely abandoned overnight, but it lost its soul. Trade networks collapsed. Artistic production ceased. The great rituals stopped. The ruling elite disappeared. The temple no longer spoke, and yet the mystery only deepened, because while the city faded, its memory endured. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon its ruins. They were awestruck. They believed gods had built this place. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They built their own myths around its pyramids, revering it as sacred ground, even as they had no idea who its original builders were. To them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin. It was a relic of divine truth. But the irony remains. The most powerful city of its time, built on cosmic order and blood, vanished without a written word, without a final record, leaving behind only stone and questions. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet. For over 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay buried beneath layers of dust, volcanic ash, and silence. Locals avoided it. Farmers tilled around it, and the world forgot it until the modern age of archaeology arrived and cracked open the secrets buried within its heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began excavating Teotihuacan. What they found was astonishing, a perfectly engineered city far older than the Aztecs. But it wasn't until the 1980s and 2000s that the temple itself began to yield its most intimate and most chilling revelations. One of the most dramatic discoveries came in 2011 when researchers uncovered a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been deliberately closed off nearly 1800 years earlier, as if to prevent anyone from entering ever again. After years of excavation, scientists unearthed a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld lined with pyrite to mimic a starlit sky, pools of liquid mercury, and thousands of ritual objects, jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, and even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb and more like a message. Why would the ancient builders go to such lengths? What were they trying to preserve or hide? Some experts believe the tunnel was used in initiation rituals. Others suggest it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological womb where gods were born, where kings were made, where divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. The mercury, once thought to be only toxic, may have represented water or the fluid veil between worlds. And among all these glittering fragments was one persistent whisper. The feathered serpent still lingered, not just as a myth but as a presence, in murals, in carvings, in the geometry of the temple itself. The serpent hadn't disappeared. It had coiled inward, deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with each excavation, each uncovered jawbone or golden ornament, we draw a little closer to its message, one carved not in language, but in stone, sacrifice, and shadow. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all our tools, one truth remains. The temple still keeps secrets. Today, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not just to a civilization long gone, but to a way of thinking that merged power, cosmos, and death into one unbreakable system. Tourists snap photos. Children run past the stone serpent heads, but the ground beneath their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and over 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple endures. Its legacy is not just architectural, it's psychological, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of sky and earth, continued to evolve. He would be adopted by the Toltecs, then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his myth took on a gentler tone, the bringer of knowledge, the god who wept for humanity, the one who vowed to return. This reimagining of the serpent god shows how myths don't die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of the feathered serpent persist, in art, in murals, in literature, and in national identity. The temple's image has appeared on coins, stamps, and even government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian brilliance, and of the untamed spiritual world that once pulsed through Mesoamerica. But there's another legacy, one less visible, more uncomfortable. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent forces us to confront the price of belief. It asks hard questions. How far will humans go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty coexist with terror? In many ways, the temple isn't just a historical site. It's a mirror, a reflection of us, our fascination with life after death, our hunger for meaning, our capacity to build monuments of staggering beauty and to stain them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness comes with shadows, that civilizations can soar to impossible heights while burying their secrets beneath the stones. And maybe that's why we keep returning, not just to visit, but to understand. Because deep down, we know the serpent is still watching. Not to strike, but to remind. Remind us of what we once were and what we still might be. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the invention of writing, even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand slapping hollow bark, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stomping earth in time. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical emerged. The first drum beat. It wasn't called music. It wasn't called anything, but it felt like something. Like communication, like movement, like emotion taking form. Anthropologists have uncovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments dating back over 30,000 years. These were likely made from natural materials, tree trunks, hollowed-out gourds, stretched animal hides. Nothing fancy, nothing preserved. But these rudimentary drums were not toys or idle distractions. They served real purposes. To warn, to summon, to connect. Picture a tribe scattered across a dense forest. One beat from a distant drum and others knew danger is coming, or a celebration has begun, or the gods are listening. The earliest drums weren't just tools. They were extensions of the human body, a heartbeat externalized, a pulse that could be felt across a valley. Drumming wasn't something you watched or listened to. It was something you participated in, together, around fires, under stars, in caves where echoes made the air itself vibrate. These ancient rhythms became a language of emotion, joy, grief, warning, hope, all expressed not in syllables or symbols, but in patterned sound. Before the first flutes were carved, before string instruments were dreamed of, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, giving shape to ritual and uniting individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument, and perhaps its first form of collective identity. No matter where on earth people lived, they created something to strike, something to beat, something to mark the moment. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human civilization, drums were not just instruments. They were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, every corner of the earth developed its own rhythm. But the purpose was nearly universal, to commune with the unseen. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with life, death, and ancestry. The djembe, carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin, was believed to contain three spirits: that of the tree it was carved from, the animal whose skin gave it voice, and the craftsman who brought it to life. Played in circles, the djembe didn't just accompany rituals, it was the ritual. Then there were the talking drums, capable of mimicking human speech through pitch and tone. In West Africa, these drums carried messages across miles, relaying news, warnings, births and deaths from one village to the next. Long before the telephone, humans were already drumming their messages through the landscape. Across the oceans, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living entity. It was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, played in ceremonies to honor ancestors, summon healing, or guide the souls of the dead. The large powwow drum, played by a circle of drummers, was both a musical and spiritual engine, a communal pulse that aligned humans with nature and spirit. In Australia, the Aboriginal people used clapsticks and percussive stomps in the sacred dreamtime, a mythic era of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans struck frame drums to enter trance states, seeking visions or communicating with spirits during long, dark winters. These weren't performances. These were acts of survival, healing, storytelling, and connection. To drum was to remember. To drum was to belong. And always, it was communal. Drums brought people together into sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. No sheet music, no stage, just bodies moving, hands striking, souls stirring, all unified by rhythm. It didn't matter where on earth you stood. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was happening, something that words alone could never express. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken, sometimes with comfort and sometimes with command. As human societies evolved into kingdoms and empires, drums transformed into tools of domination, instruments of order, and weapons of fear. The earliest armies didn't have radios or megaphones. They had drums. In ancient China, massive drums called gu were struck to coordinate troops across vast terrains. With a single resonant boom, commanders could signal a charge, retreat, or flanking maneuver. These drums weren't just loud, they were strategic. Each rhythm meant something specific, and trained soldiers knew how to listen, even through the chaos of battle. In Mesopotamia, temple drums were used to announce rulers and summon the public, but in times of conflict, they echoed through city walls, terrifying enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they brought with them the tympanum, a frame drum used in processions and by cults like that of Cybele. Though not a battlefield instrument in the way horns and standards were, it carried symbolic power, a sound of empire, discipline, and order. But no army wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. Their metabands, the world's first known military orchestras, unleashed an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battles. The relentless pounding of kurs, giant kettle drums, and davul, double-headed bass drums, struck terror into the hearts of enemy forces. Some European accounts describe soldiers freezing in panic before even seeing the Ottomans, paralysed by sound. Drums also enforced power off the battlefield. In royal courts across Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles announced arrivals, marked coronations, and underscored political rituals. To beat a drum was to declare power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas used drums as tools of resistance. On plantations, rhythmic communication kept culture alive and helped orchestrate secret rebellions. The drum, even under oppression, refused to be silenced. So whether it signaled divine right, military discipline, or raw fear, the drum has always carried a message. This is who rules, this is who marches, and this is the rhythm of power. As civilizations branched out across continents, so too did their rhythms, evolving in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became tools of precision, spirituality, and ceremony. In the West, they leaned into military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two paths, one heartbeat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of divine language. The tabla, with its crisp tones and fluid grace, was used in classical music and devotional performances. But it was more than accompaniment, it was conversation. Each stroke had a name, a meaning, a syllabic identity. Indian drumming wasn't just percussive, it was spoken poetry, trained over decades. The tabla player was not just a musician, he was a linguist of rhythm. In Japan, the taiko drum emerged as a ceremonial giant. Played in Shinto rituals, theatre, and war, taiko required not just technical skill, but physical discipline. The drummers moved with martial precision, their stances grounded like warriors. In festivals, the booming taiko echoed through mountain valleys, believed to drive away evil spirits and call the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic flows of gamelan orchestras, guiding dancers and musicians in sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were layered, interlocked, and celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony. Across the world, in Europe, drums had a different story. They were largely utilitarian during the medieval period, signalling soldiers, marking time, enforcing discipline. It wasn't until the Renaissance and Baroque eras that drums began to enter formal music. Even then, they were kept in the background, subtly thundering beneath royal fanfare or echoing in grand cathedrals. In this divergence, you see two philosophies. The East saw rhythm as art and spirit, something tied to breath, chant, and meditation. The West saw it as structure and force, a tool to rally, march, and measure. But both understood the drum's core power, to shape time, to dictate pace, to elevate ritual, to connect humans in ways that transcend language. East or West, sacred or strategic, the drum remained central, always listening, always speaking. From mountaintop temples to jungle clearings, from desert fires to candlelit cathedrals, drums have always had a place where the human meets the divine. Long before organized religion took root, rhythm was already a sacred language, a way to pray, to summon, to transcend. In Africa, drums were not just instruments, they were spiritual beings. In Yoruba traditions, for example, the bata drum was used to communicate with the orishas, gods, and ancestral spirits. Drummers weren't performers, they were priests. The rhythms they played were encoded prayers, inviting the gods to descend and dance among the living. Each pattern had a purpose, each beat a direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears even in the hands of gods. The deity Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, dances the cosmic dance of creation and destruction with a small, hourglass-shaped drum in hand, the Damaru. Its beat represents the pulse of the universe itself, from silence to sound, from void to form. The drum is a divine heartbeat. In Buddhism, the ritual frame drum is used in monastic chants and meditation ceremonies. Its slow, soft strikes guide breath and awareness, acting like a metronome for the soul. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it simply reminds the practitioner to return again and again to the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous tribes use drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The beat is constant, steady, mimicking the rhythm of the womb, helping participants enter trance states or connect with ancestral spirits. In these spaces, the drum doesn't just accompany prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued, the drum still found a sacred role. In gospel traditions, particularly in African American churches, drums became a means of praise and power, a heartbeat behind voices lifted in devotion, a reminder of struggle, hope, and divine rhythm in every life. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the god invoked, the drum has been there, not as decoration, but as a vessel for energy, intention, and the mysteries we cannot speak. Because when words fail in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were single instruments, one body, one sound, one purpose. But in the heart of the industrial age, something revolutionary happened. In factories, streets, and music halls, percussion was reimagined, and by the early 20th century, multiple drums were no longer scattered across a stage. They were united, forming something entirely new, the drum kit. It was born out of necessity. In the late 1800s, military and theatre bands required several percussionists to play bass drum, snare, cymbals, and woodblocks, each handled by a different person. But space was tight and budgets were tighter, so drummers began to combine instruments into a single playable setup. By 1909, the first bass drum pedal was patented. A drummer could now strike a massive drum with one foot, freeing their hands to do more. The idea caught fire. Over the next few decades, drummers added hi-hats, toms, cowbells, and ride cymbals, creating a setup that could mimic an entire percussion section, all from one seat. What emerged was more than a tool. It was a drummer's throne. And then came jazz. In smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit exploded into life. Jazz drummers didn't just keep time, they played the kit like a voice, with syncopation, swing, and sensitivity. Legends like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich turned the drum set into a lead instrument. Rhythm became storytelling. As jazz evolved into rock, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, more powerful. The 1960s and 70s saw kits expand with multiple toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed the limits of stamina and creativity. The drummer wasn't in the background anymore. He or she was the engine. Today, the drum kit is a global staple, from gospel churches to EDM stages, from punk garages to world tours. And even as digital kits and drum machines rise, the physicality of a live drum kit, the sticks, the skins, the sweat, remains irreplaceable. It's a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries where tradition meets innovation, and where one drummer can speak with 10 voices at once. The world beats in thousands of dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent, culture to culture, the drum has taken countless forms, each carrying a distinct identity, sound, and purpose. These aren't just instruments, they're cultural signatures, crafted from local materials, shaped by local hands, and steeped in the rhythms of everyday life. In West Africa, the djembe remains a heartbeat of community gatherings. It speaks in sharp slaps and deep bass tones, designed for storytelling and spontaneous conversation. Next to it, the dun-dun provides the foundational pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others can dance. In Africa, a drum ensemble isn't just music. It's a conversation between spirits, ancestors, and the living. In the Middle East, the darbuka, a goblet-shaped drum made from clay or metal, delivers crisp, fast-paced rhythms essential to belly dancing and classical Arabic music. Its voice is sharp and articulate, demanding precision from its player and movement from its listeners. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell a different story, one born from resilience and fusion. The conga, bongo, and timbale reflect the blend of African, indigenous, and Spanish influences. In Cuba, the sacred bata drums are used in Santeria rituals, each drum speaking a divine language tied to the orishas. In Brazil, the thunder of surdo and cuica drive samba parades through the streets, infusing joy into protest, prayer, and carnival. In India, the mridangam and tabla dominate South and North Indian classical music respectively. These drums are so precise they are tuned to pitch, blurring the line between rhythm and melody. Each finger movement matters, each stroke carries centuries of tradition. Then there's the frame drum, one of the oldest in human history, appearing in everything from Persian daf to Irish bodhran, from shamanic tools to folk ensembles. Played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes, it's proof that even simplicity can be sacred. What unites them all? Purpose. Whether guiding dance, healing, ritual, or revolution, Each drum reflects the soul of its people. Their rhythms carry geography, history, and identity. The global drum family isn't just diverse, it's universal, because no matter where you go, the earth still echoes with rhythm. As the 20th century drew to a close, the sound of drums began to change, not in rhythm, but in texture. The physical gave way to the programmable. The sweaty palms, the wooden sticks, the calloused fingertips all began to share space with circuits, pads, and software. The age of digital drums had arrived. It began in the 1970s with primitive drum machines. Early devices like the Rhythmicon and Roland CR78 used analog circuits to simulate basic beats. At first, they sounded robotic, even awkward, but musicians saw something else: consistency, control, and endless possibility. Then came a revolution. In 1980, Roland released the TR-808, a drum machine so iconic its deep, booming kick and crisp snare would go on to define entire genres. Hip-hop, techno, electro, and trap were all born in part from its synthetic pulse. It was no longer about mimicking acoustic drums, it was about creating new sounds entirely. As digital audio progressed, so did the tools. Electronic drum kits like the Roland V drums allowed drummers to play naturally while triggering thousands of sampled or synthesized tones. Artists could now rehearse silently, record without microphones, and switch drum kits with the press of a button. And with computers came digital audio workstations, DAWs, like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Now anyone with a laptop could build complex rhythms, layering kicks, snares, hi-hats, and sub-bass into vast sonic architectures. Finger drumming on MIDI pads became an art form of its own. Some feared this shift meant the death of traditional drumming, a replacement of human feel with cold precision. But that didn't happen. Instead, hybridity emerged. Acoustic drummers began integrating triggers and samples into their kits. Producers started layering human-played drums with machine beats. The organic and the synthetic found a groove together. Digital drums didn't erase the past, they reimagined it. And today, we live in a world where a single person in a bedroom can build rhythms once requiring entire orchestras, where ancient grooves from Africa, Asia, and the Americas can be sampled, twisted, and given new life in neon-lit dance floors. The tools have changed, but the purpose remains the same: to move bodies, to shape time, to make silence speak. Across every era, every empire, and every evolution in technology, one thing has never changed. The drum remains our oldest and most enduring voice. From ancient fire circles to modern concert halls, from sacred rituals to digital dance floors, the drum has never been just about music. It's about connection to ourselves, to each other, to something bigger. It is the heartbeat we all share, not metaphorically, literally. Because even before we're born, nestled in the womb, the first rhythm we ever hear is that of our mother's heart, steady, safe, alive. And when life begins, we chase that rhythm forever. The drum has been our companion through joy and war, through worship and protest. It has marched beside kings and risen with rebels. It has echoed through temples and subway tunnels. It speaks in every language because it is a language, one that bypasses thought and speaks directly to the body, the bones, the blood. In moments of grief, we drum to mourn. In moments of ecstasy, we drum to celebrate. And in the quiet spaces in between, we drum to remember who we are. Today, percussion continues to evolve. You can find handpan street musicians weaving new age rhythms on city corners, indigenous communities preserving ancient drumming traditions against all odds, stadium drummers rallying crowds in unison, children banging pots and pans with instinctual joy. Even artificial intelligence is learning rhythm. But no algorithm can replicate the human soul behind a single imperfect beat, because rhythm is not just counted, it's felt. And maybe that's why the drum has outlived empires and trends, because deep down we all crave the anchor of time, the shared pulse that tells us we are here, together, now. No matter how advanced our instruments become or how virtual our experiences grow, there will always be something profoundly grounding about skin on skin, stick on hide, hand on wood, a beat, a breath, a beginning. The drum is not a relic of the past. It is a reminder that we were always meant to move in rhythm, to listen, to feel, to play. And as long as humanity endures, the drum will never be silent. Before Manhattan became a forest of glass and steel, it was an island of shadows, not cast by towers, but by church steeples and sloping rooftops. In the early 1800s, the skyline barely existed. The city clung to the southern tip of the island, a dense sprawl of brick townhouses, timber-framed shops, and dirt-packed roads. Buildings rarely climbed beyond 5 or 6 stories, not because ambition was lacking, but because gravity had the final say. The taller the building, the more weight it carried, and with stone and brick, height came at a steep price. The walls had to be thicker at the bottom to support the upper levels, leaving less room inside and requiring enormous foundations. To build high was to build heavy, and heavy didn't make financial sense, so the city grew horizontally, spreading northward along a grid that had been planned in 1811, one of the boldest urban blueprints of its time. But underneath that grid, beneath the layers of cobblestone and soil, Manhattan held a secret weapon. Bedrock, deep, dense, and unwavering. The granite spine that ran beneath the island would one day support some of the tallest structures in human history, but for now it lay quiet, untouched, waiting. Life in early Manhattan was noisy but grounded. Commerce bustled in the harbour, ships lined the piers, and horses clattered through narrow streets. The economy grew, immigration surged, and the island swelled with energy, but still the city hugged the ground. The sky remained untouched. The only real vertical statements were churches, Trinity Church being the most prominent. Its spire, completed in 1846, rose over 280 feet, and for a time it was the tallest structure in New York. But even that was more symbol than skyline. What no one knew then was that the skyline's future wouldn't be shaped by stone or wood, but by iron, steel, and vision. And it wouldn't be limited by the ground. It would rise far above it. Manhattan wasn't yet a city of towers, but the stage was being set. The island was ready. The dream was forming, and soon the skyline would begin to stretch. For centuries, gravity was the greatest architect in Manhattan. It kept buildings short, cities flat, and human ambition tethered to the earth. But in the mid-19th century, 2 breakthroughs would break the skyline wide open. One lifted people, the other lifted buildings. The first came in 1852, when an inventor named Elisha Otis unveiled his revolutionary safety elevator. In a dramatic demonstration at the New York Crystal Palace, Otis stood on a platform suspended high above a crowd. He ordered the rope to be cut. The crowd gasped, but the platform didn't fall. A hidden mechanism locked the lift in place. With that single breathtaking moment, Otis changed the rules of height. Until then, the top floors of buildings were the cheapest. No one wanted to climb stairs. But once elevators became safe and practical, those upper floors became premium space, offering light, air, and status. The vertical city suddenly made economic sense. But being able to move people upward wasn't enough. Buildings still relied on load-bearing walls, which grew thicker and more cumbersome the higher they went. That's where innovation number 2 arrived: the steel skeleton. In the 1880s and 1890s, engineers began using steel frames to support the weight of buildings, allowing exterior walls to become thin curtains rather than heavy structural anchors. This method, known as steel frame construction, gave architects a new freedom: build as high as the frame could handle. Suddenly, height was no longer a risk. It was a strategy. The technology had arrived. The materials were here. And Manhattan, with its solid bedrock and booming economy, was the perfect canvas. The island's tight geography encouraged vertical thinking, and its status as a financial capital meant that everyone from banks to newspapers wanted their name visible in the clouds. The elevator made the sky accessible. The steel skeleton made the sky buildable. Together, they didn't just change architecture, they redefined what a city could be. Now the race would begin, not outward, upward. By the late 19th century, New York City was no longer content to sprawl, it wanted to soar. The ground was full, the streets were packed, and the only place left to build was up. With steel frame construction and the elevator now established, Manhattan became a proving ground, and the skyline a battlefield for ambition. The first shots were fired in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York World Building, home to Joseph Pulitzer's newspaper empire, rose 20 stories above Park Row. It was the tallest office building in the world, briefly. Not to be outdone, the Park Row building claimed the title next in 1899, standing at 391 feet. Each new tower was a declaration, not just of wealth, but of vision. To build higher was to announce, "We are the future." Soon, the skyline began to sprout with steel giants. The Singer Building, completed in 1908, stood at 612 feet, becoming the tallest building in the world and the first structure to surpass the height of the spire of Trinity Church, which had held the record for over 50 years. But even that wouldn't last. In 1913, the Woolworth Building took the crown. Designed by architect Cass Gilbert and funded in cash by retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth, it rose 792 feet, over 55 stories, in a soaring display of neo-Gothic beauty. Dubbed the Cathedral of Commerce, the Woolworth wasn't just tall, it was majestic, an architectural sermon about America's rise as a modern power. But this wasn't just architectural competition, it was branding warfare. Corporations and institutions vied for the tallest, most distinctive buildings, towers that would etch their names into the sky. Every new height was a headline, every silhouette a symbol. The skyscraper became the ultimate billboard, permanent, imposing, impossible to ignore. And beneath it all, the rhythm of progress beat relentlessly. Steam shovels dug foundations into granite. Riveters hammered steel day and night. Immigrants and iron workers balanced on beams hundreds of feet in the air with no harnesses, only grit and resolve. The skyline was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it was rising. As the 1920s roared through Manhattan, the skyline began to dance, not just climb. This was the era of Art Deco, a time when architecture wasn't only about height, but style. The Jazz Age poured elegance into steel and stone, and New York's buildings became icons of movement, light, and energy. The most dazzling of them all was the Chrysler Building. Completed in 1930, it stood 1,046 feet tall, briefly becoming the tallest building in the world. Commissioned by car magnate Walter Chrysler, the tower wasn't just a monument to corporate success. It was a symphony of design. Its stainless steel spire, built in secret and hoisted into place overnight, shimmered in the sun like a crown. Ornamental eagles, modelled after hood ornaments, jutted from the corners like guardians of the future. With its curves, chevrons, and machine-age detailing, The Chrysler Building didn't just scrape the sky, it seduced it. But the race wasn't over. Just a few blocks away, another titan was rising. The Empire State Building, completed in 1931 during the depths of the Great Depression, soared to 1,250 feet, stealing the title from Chrysler and holding it for nearly 40 years. Built in just 410 days with thousands of workers laboring through wind, snow, and steel dust, the Empire State wasn't just a building, it was a message. New York endures. While much of the country struggled, Manhattan pushed upward, and its buildings mirrored the era's dual identity: elegant but aggressive, optimistic yet competitive. The Art Deco style captured the contradictions of the time: geometric but graceful, modern but steeped in myth. Towers weren't just functional, they were sculpted, glowing at night like beacons of possibility, and yet beneath all that glitter there was purpose. These skyscrapers were built by barons and moguls who wanted more than profit. They wanted legacy, a permanent place in the skyline and in history. By the end of the 1930s, Manhattan's silhouette had taken shape. The city was no longer just a capital of finance. It was a cathedral of ambition, a skyline that didn't whisper progress. It shouted it. After World War II, Manhattan's skyline entered a new phase, one less ornamental, more corporate. The elegance of Art Deco gave way to glass, steel, and straight lines. America was now a global superpower, and New York was the front office of that empire. The skyline adapted accordingly, not with decorative spires, but with monuments of efficiency. In 1952, the United Nations headquarters rose on the East River, a bold, boxy glass tower flanked by low marble wings. It marked a shift in tone: global, diplomatic, futuristic. It wasn't just a building. It was an architectural statement about international order in the atomic age, and it set the tone for what would follow. Next came the Lever House in 1952 and the Seagram Building in 1958, both defining examples of the international style. These towers, with their curtain walls of reflective glass and steel frames, were minimalist by design, free of decoration, stripped of sentiment. They didn't look like cathedrals or castles. They looked like machines, precise, modern, and ruthlessly practical. The Seagram Building, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, was especially influential. Its bronze-tinted glass, uniform grid, and open plaza introduced a new kind of urban presence. Not to impress with flourishes, but to project order, discipline, and power. This was corporate architecture at its peak, cold, beautiful, and authoritative. As businesses boomed, so did the skyline. Midtown became the hub for America's major corporations, banks, media companies, law firms. These new skyscrapers didn't compete for beauty. They competed for square footage, for location, and for presence on the horizon. Gone were the soaring spires and gargoyles. In their place stood mirrored monoliths, anonymous giants that reflected not just the clouds, but the ambitions of Wall Street. And yet, in their silence and simplicity, these towers spoke volumes. They told the story of a country obsessed with growth, precision, and modernity. They defined the corporate era, shaping the look and feel of cities across the globe. But even amid all this glass and steel, one thing remained true. The skyline was still a symbol, only now it whispered power rather than shouted beauty. By the late 1960s, New York was already a vertical masterpiece, but it still had room to dream bigger. That dream took shape at the southern tip of Manhattan, where a pair of identical towers would soon alter the skyline forever. They were bold, controversial, and unlike anything the world had ever seen. They were the twin towers of the World Trade Center. Conceived as a hub for global commerce, the World Trade Center project was overseen by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Architect Minoru Yamasaki designed the buildings with a radical minimalist approach: vertical lines, aluminum cladding, no setbacks. Each tower would rise over 1,360 feet, dwarfing every building before them. The ambition wasn't just architectural, it was ideological, a statement of global connectivity, a new temple for capitalism. Construction began in 1966. To make room, an entire neighborhood, Radio Row, was raised. The foundations required a revolutionary technique known as the slurry wall, allowing engineers to build deep into the soft riverbed while holding back the Hudson. It was one of the most challenging engineering feats of its time. When completed in 1973, the Twin Towers weren't universally loved. Some critics called them sterile or boxy. Others mourned the loss of the ornate towers of the past. But to many, the towers were pure presence, bold, confident, and commanding. They didn't dance with the sky like the Chrysler. They didn't taper like the Empire State. They stood firm, twin pillars of certainty and scale. More than just buildings, the World Trade Center became an international symbol of business, of unity, of American might. People came from around the world to visit the observation decks, to dine at windows on the world, or simply to stare up in awe from the plaza below. For nearly 3 decades, the Twin Towers dominated Lower Manhattan. They anchored the skyline, giving it symmetry and gravitas, and while other cities built taller structures, none carried the iconic weight of those 2 towers rising side by side. The skyline had changed once again, this time not with ornament or artistry, but with monumental ambition. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the Manhattan skyline changed forever. Not by cranes or construction, but by violence and smoke. In less than 2 hours, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center collapsed into dust, fire, and twisted steel. Thousands of lives were lost, and the 2 pillars that had once defined Lower Manhattan were gone. The attack wasn't just an assault on people or buildings, it was an assault on symbols, on what those towers stood for: commerce, modernity, freedom, ambition. For decades, the Twin Towers had defined the southern end of the island. Their clean, monolithic forms had become visual shorthand for New York itself. Now that skyline was fractured. In the days and weeks that followed, Lower Manhattan became a wound, open, smouldering, raw. Where once there had been height and light, there was only absence, and that absence echoed. Photographs of the skyline looked hollow. The familiar silhouette was broken, and the space that had once pulsed with global energy became known as Ground Zero. For the first time in a century, Manhattan wasn't building up. It was mourning. The city grieved, but it also endured. Steel workers, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers poured into the site, not to construct, but to recover. Rubble was cleared. Lives were honored. Silence replaced the clang of iron. In a city always rushing forward, this was a forced pause, a long breath held in collective pain. But even in sorrow, New York did what it had always done. It looked up. Discussions about rebuilding were complicated, emotional, political. What should take the place of the towers? Should anything rise again? Could the skyline be restored without erasing the loss? For years, the hole in the ground remained, a reminder of what was and what was taken. It became sacred space. And yet, slowly, plans emerged. Designs were drafted. Cranes returned. Steel returned. Not to erase the tragedy, but to create something new beside it. But before anything was built, one truth stood clear. The skyline was no longer just a symbol of power or ambition. It had become a memorial, a silhouette shaped by both triumph and tragedy. And the story wasn't over. In the aftermath of devastation, a city known for speed, ambition, and movement paused, not to surrender, but to reimagine. Rebuilding the Manhattan skyline after 9/11 wasn't just a matter of architecture, it was a matter of identity. What would rise in place of the Twin Towers? Could anything? The answers came slowly. In 2003, a design by architect Daniel Libeskind was selected for the new World Trade Center site. It wasn't just about height, it was about healing, memory, and renewal. The plan would blend commercial space with public memorials, parks, transportation, and light. It wasn't a return to what had been, it was a statement of what could be. At the heart of it all stood a new tower, One World Trade Center. Originally called the Freedom Tower, rising from the northwest corner of Ground Zero, it would become the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere at 1,776 feet, a number chosen to echo the year of America's independence. But this wasn't just about patriotism, it was about defiance, about reaching up again despite loss. Construction began in 2006, and in 2014, One World Trade Center opened its doors. Clad in shimmering glass and standing like a crystal obelisk, it didn't try to imitate the past. It offered something new, reflection, both literal and symbolic. The building changes with the sky, glowing, darkening, disappearing depending on the light. It is presence without arrogance. Beside it, the 9/11 Memorial opened in 2011. Two deep voids where the original towers once stood, each with a continuous waterfall and the names of the fallen etched into bronze. It's not just part of the skyline, it's part of the city's soul. The new skyline took years to take shape. Other towers rose, 3 WTC, 4 WTC, and 7 WTC, each one sleek, modern, and purposeful. Together they represent not just a city rebuilt, but a city transformed. New York didn't just replace what was lost, it evolved. It honored the past while building for the future. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something deeply American and deeply human. You can knock a city down, but you can't keep it from rising. Today, the Manhattan skyline is more than a collection of buildings. It is a living symbol of ambition, of resilience, of the American dream itself. No other silhouette in the world carries so much weight. It's etched into pop culture, history, and memory. You can draw it with 5 lines, and people will recognize it instantly. It tells a story of bold engineers and fearless iron workers, of architects who imagined spires that pierced clouds, and of immigrants who crossed oceans to help build them. It speaks of risk, reward, and reinvention, the constant churn of New York itself. It has never been finished, and it never will be. The skyline is alive, always changing. In recent years, it stretched even higher, but not in Lower Manhattan. This time, the vertical race moved uptown. Along Billionaire's Row, super slender residential towers like 432 Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111 West 57th Street now rise like needles above Midtown. These skyscrapers are feats of engineering, pencil-thin, wind-tested, and made for the ultra-wealthy. Critics call them sky-piercing expressions of inequality. Others see them as marvels of modern ambition. Meanwhile, in Hudson Yards, an entirely new neighborhood has appeared with gleaming glass towers, public art, and corporate headquarters rising where rail yards once sprawled. The skyline now stretches farther west, evolving with the city's changing needs and ambitions. But even as it grows, the skyline holds its past tightly. The Empire State Building still glows at night. The Chrysler still gleams at sunrise, and One World Trade Center stands solemn and proud. The skyline remembers what came before, even as it reaches for what's next. More than any monument or statue, it is the skyline that defines New York, not just in form, but in meaning. It's a place where humanity dared to build upward again and again, through booms, busts, wars, and wounds. A city of millions reflected in steel and glass. It doesn't just mark where the city ends, it marks where dreams begin. Because in Manhattan, the sky has never been the limit. It's just the next floor built.